said something really brilliant?
No, I did.
Okay, of
I
course.
did too.
Everything you say is brilliant.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted you on. I'm just like listening in awe here. Um, okay, so I think we could, I mean, we can talk for an hour just on sort of the universal mind and sort of the ego and all this, but let's move on because we're really trying to provide an overview without sort of getting lost in the weeds of the details, right?
Yeah.
So let's move to consciousness, which is our, basically that's our sense of reality as far as I understand it, right? That's how we perceive reality. That's consciousness in reality, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's the power that brings our thinking to life and gives us an experience of reality or of life.
Hmm.
It's kind of like the HD like special effects department, that brings, so it's that again like the projector that brings what's on that film to life for you in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it brings up so many sort of ideas, and there's whole industries sort of founded just on sort of this idea of consciousness and reality. I mean, you have the book The Secret, which, and the Law of Attraction, which launched sort of an entire industry onto itself. So I mean, I think really it begs the question, and I think the question that people have around this is how much or to what extent are they really in control of this process?
Well, it's an interesting kind of paradox. I think we aren't in control of it at all. I mean, it happens whether we even know that it exists or not. So ultimately, we don't have any control over it. But the paradox is that, at the same time, we, Sid said in the quote that you read, we have the ability to be free thinkers. So the more that and I think that, our free will and all of that comes in really, it's kind of optimized, I think, the more that we understand how this all works. So when you see how thought works and that it's very arbitrary and that it just sort of arises within us. It's not our thinking. It's not something that, belongs to us. It's just simply kind of what, it's spiritual stuff manifest into human minds. And it's just kind of the stuff that occurs to us on a regular basis. We don't make that happen. We're not in charge of that. But at the same time, when you see how that happens and how it just naturally occurs and flows and comes and goes on its own, you do have some free will in there. You have a lot of free will as to like what you want to do with that, and what you don't need to believe everything that runs through your head, and a lot of people who don't know better do think that everything that runs through their head signifies some reality or some truth, So it gives you enormous freedom to just feel your way around a little bit and let things go if they're leading you and if they don't feel right or they're leading you in directions that you don't want to go in, and grab onto the stuff that does feel good.
Mm. So that begs another couple questions. Rodriguez, I forget his name, the guy that wrote the Four Agreements, he talks about sort of the domestication of our minds as children, sort of like as if we were dogs in some way. So that begs a further question, which is sort of nature versus nurture, right? Like how much of this is just sort of big mind running through us and creating these thoughts that oftentimes are very self-limiting. Not that big mind is creating self-limiting thoughts, but a lot of our thoughts are self-limiting. So the question is, where does that come from, and why? And also then, like, why do we think that this is us? You know what I mean? Like, and maybe this is sort of the domestication process. And then also in terms of, you brought up free will, like, I think a non-dualist would say that we have free will, but within a certain band. You know what I mean? Based on our sort of, what is realistically available. I don't know. You can take that anywhere you want to go.
Okay, so the first part, the like, where does it come from? I don't know where it comes from.
Mm.
I really don't have any idea why we why we have the thoughts that we have, why they show up to us the way that they do, not a clue. But what I do know, I mean, what I think everyone kind of just intuitively knows is that the way that we interact with our thinking plays a role for sure. So, just to give you an example, like I used to have extreme panic attacks when I was in graduate school. I was basically homebound for like 2 years straight, paranoid, like scared to death to leave my apartment. And I had, therapists and all kinds of well-meaning people telling me that that was my personality, and that, I had an anxious personality, and that I had this disorder, and that, it was a really real kind of stable thing, and that I was probably going to be anxious my whole life, and all of that stuff, which is just the state of psychology. I mean, that's what they would say. And to the extent that I believed that, which I totally did, it played a role in what thoughts occurred to me. When you believe something, when you see something as truth, I mean, so then I had these anxious thoughts come up more and more, and when they did, I would fuel them with a bunch of attention and a bunch of emotion and a bunch of fear, so that made them come back even more and more. And I would look back at the past and say, oh yeah, that time when I was 6 and I had these random stomach aches all the time, those were actually panic attacks. And like, it made me think about my whole past differently. So it absolutely, like the way that what we believe and the way that we interact with our thoughts influences what shows up for us. I think that's absolutely true. But how it initially kind of shows up one way or another got me. I mean, it's really, and what thought is going to pop into my head 2 seconds from now, or into your head 2 seconds from now, or 2 days from now, we couldn't even guess. We really couldn't. I mean, and truly, I think that is a mystery. I don't know anyone who really could answer those questions. So that's just a little bit on kind of like where it comes from. Which again is a bit of a both. It's a mystery and it's spiritual, and we don't really understand it. And at the same time, we humans have some impact on it. We have a little bit of free will there, and we play a role. What was the free will question?
Well, I mean, actually, I think you're on a very interesting thread here. I don't want to break it. Okay. What if the thought is habitual? Because like you said, like one day to the next, it's random, who knows, etc. And of course that's valid, but there also seem to be sort of habitual thought patterns. And obviously a lot of people suffer from habitual thought patterns that aren't helpful, and they take them very seriously, right?
Yeah. So seeing that we get habitual stuff, and it's not serious. It's just habitual thought. I mean, that's almost, to me, almost more like how the brain works, which is just a scientific question. That's like, our brain, like certain pathways get activated and get stronger and stronger, and that's just where thought goes in the brain, And so again, like it's meaningless, and I think there's so much freedom in that, because that really doesn't feel meaningless. But where it comes from is the same source that all thought comes from, that all experience comes from. It comes from universal mind. It comes from the great oneness, or whatever they call it. It comes from God. It comes from whatever it is, and it gets manifest in each of us humans in a very kind of almost tangible, kind of physical way through the thinking that we have. But to try to sort of figure that out, and to assume that because we have a bunch of thoughts over and over again, they must mean something, I think is, just what gets innocently, just gets a lot of people in trouble.
Do you think there's any value in sort of the process of inquiry, which is basically taking a thought and just sort of trying to deconstruct the layers of it?
Okay, so no is my answer, but I don't know what's helpful. To me, no. In this moment right now, no. I don't know what's helpful for other people. I mean, I think anything can be helpful. I think, if you have the hiccups and you drink upside down while holding your nose and singing happy birthday, that's probably going to make somebody's hiccups go away. So I'm not going to say that that's not helpful as a rule. I have no clue. Do I want to inquire into my completely random and arbitrary thoughts? No. And it's just not something that I think is necessary. But again, I'm sure it's helpful for people. And honestly, I think really all have to just follow. We all have our own wisdom and our own guidance as to what's going to be helpful for us. So I don't think there's anything in the world that's across the board helpful or not helpful.
All right, so let's take a habitual thought that we have that's self-limiting, that is sort of been, solidified in our mind through the process of synapse, electrical currents and all that. And sort of this sort of, process has become ingrained because it's something we believe in, it's something we tell ourselves maybe every time we look in the mirror, or every time we think about money or career or family life or lack of something, anything.
Yeah.
So how would we use the three principles to help people sort of loosen these synapses and maybe sort of get the brain to reconnect in a way that actually serves them, in a way that's positive, in a way that's sort of self-reinforcing as opposed to sort of self-limiting?
Yeah, when you see the truth of how it works, you stop fearing it so much. So when, it's very natural to think that anything that's said over and over in your own head, in your own voice, is truth. But when you see just, even just the physical way that you described it, the biological explanation for it, like when we just look at it a little bit deeper and see that thought isn't inherently meaningful and that we don't have to respect it all and take it all seriously, I think what keeps the habitual thoughts going a lot of times, again, is our attention to it and the way that we kind of interact with it and replay it and take it as truth. When you start to see that something really isn't as valid or stable as you once thought it was, you just very naturally don't pay as much attention to it. Like the metaphor that comes to mind for that is nightmares. When someone has a horrible nightmare, you wake up and you say, man, that was a horrible dream. I'm sure glad I'm awake. I'm glad that wasn't real. And we can wake up to daytime thought, habitual thought, like you're talking about, in a similar way. You say, wow, yeah. I just spoke with a woman who every time her teenage children leave the house, she's completely besides herself in worry of, just the scenarios about car accidents and drinking too much and all of the stuff. And it's so understandable, but she has to, like, when she comes to see that her mind, her consciousness, and her thought are basically just putting on a show for her, has nothing to do with, because she can have those same concerns when her kids are sitting right next to her. It has nothing to do with her kids being gone. Nothing at all to do with the circumstance. It's totally within her. It's her mind is putting on a show, and she's just falling for it and thinking that it reflects reality. And when we see that our thinking doesn't reflect reality in that way, that we've been kind of taught that it does, we've really been told that it does, and it doesn't. It's just a misunderstanding. When we see through that misunderstanding, it just, you're just not going to pay as much attention, and those thoughts just are not going to come as much.
Yeah, it's understandable too, because when you watch television or something, all you hear about is teenage pregnancy and drunk driving and just these horrible things that then sort of becomes very real to you. So you can totally understand how difficult that must be for her.
Yeah, definitely. It just gets really confusing, You almost forget sometimes what you're making up and what you've heard and what actually has happened. And, I think we've all been in that place where you're so beside yourself with worry and habitual thinking and all of that it's like, wait a minute, none of this has even happened. Like, it kind of hits you in that way. Like, wait a minute, this isn't even real. And it's having moments like that, of those insights of how we're creating it all ourselves, that really, really change it for people.
Mm.
One other thing I just want to say, like, what I think makes it especially sticky and confusing is that I think we just, even when you kind of are onto this, you kind of get that your mind is a big special effects department just putting on a show. There's still a sense of like, well, we're still tying it to the outside so much. And there's still like, well, this thing happened, and then that's what led to the show. So let's say you, like, your boss calls you into his office and has this big stern talk with you or whatever. Well, that might put off, all these alarm bells in your mind about, like, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to end up homeless, all of this stuff. But And so it feels so natural and easy to say, well, no, my boss called me into the office. You don't understand. Like, this is a real problem, right? Like, that event is what is creating all of this worry. And it makes
Mm-hmm.
it look and feel so tied to the outside world. It makes it look and feel like there's a grain of truth in it, that there's some validity to it, that it's protective. And it's so important to see that it never is coming from, even when outside events happen, when they do, what we're experiencing is not about that. We experience our own thinking, and our own thinking is kind of like this filter for the outside events. So, I mean, it's entirely possible that someone's boss could call them into their office and they would not go down that big, doomsday scenario in their mind. And it's entirely possible that their boss could smile at them in the lunchroom and they could go down that doomsday scenario in their mind. It really isn't tied to what's happening. It's completely coming from within us, and it's just that our mind is constantly pulling in little things from the outside world, spinning it with whatever habitual or arbitrary thoughts happen to be in our head, and creating scenarios. And we mistake those scenarios for reality. So it's all inside out, 100% pure subjective thought, but it just doesn't look that way. It never looks that way, and that's what really makes it confusing.
That was a great example, and I think that brings up some interesting questions, because the experience of getting chewed out by your boss is an experience in consciousness, meaning we have some responsibility for it, for at that exact moment in time, right? So how do we understand sort of how much of that sort of happening or event is actually, caused by us?
So say more about that. Like, what do you mean that we have some responsibility, or that we need to figure out what's caused by it?
Yeah. Well, let's assume that the boss is a good boss, and the reason he's yelling at you is because there is truth in what he's saying, right? So, sort of, I believe that then we were responsible for getting chewed out because we did something along the line to put us in a sort of a situation where we weren't in line with what we were being paid to be doing somehow.
Okay.
So there was either somewhere a miscommunication in terms of the expectations of what you were supposed to be doing, or you're just sort of not conscious to what you're doing, and maybe your boss is literally trying to give you a wake-up call.
Okay.
So I think there's sort of a lot of lessons in there that maybe we can sort of extract from that example that you gave.
I mean, there probably are for individuals on a case-by-case basis. But I guess so that's fine, and that's not really. I mean, is there a question in that, or I'm just curious, because the boss, maybe he's right, maybe you messed up, but it's still true that your experience of the entire conversation and your experience that you have after the conversation and before the conversation is coming from your own thinking. And that's
right.
Regardless of whether you did something to deserve the chewing out or not, and that's all we're pointing to. So it's not as complicated as looking at, well, did I deserve it, and now what do I do? It's simply that our experience is coming from our own thinking, whether, regardless of any other circumstances.
Yeah. No, there is sort of a specific question in there. One of the things I try to do is get people out of sort of the victim mentality, out of that sort of codependence, that it's, the poor me sort of thing. So I'm trying to understand how to help people break sort of that victim mentality so they can really sort of come into their strength as a human being, with the aid of the three principles or non-duality philosophy, or sort of, A Course in Miracles truth,
Yeah. So, without knowing anything about a victim mentality, it's just true that a victim mentality is nothing but thought. It's
Mm.
their habitual thought, right? It's their habitual thought thinking about themselves. And so it just seems like the more that one knows that and starts to see again that it has nothing to do with the circumstances, that it's not that they are a victim or they aren't a victim. It kind of doesn't matter whether they are or aren't in some objective way, if we could even determine that. It's about the fact that their experience of feeling like a victim is coming from their thinking in each and every moment. And what we tend to do is take on a role like that, like I'm a victim, and then we just kind of carry it around with us, not realizing that the truth of human beings and the truth of our psyche is that it is washed clear in every second. It is completely wiped clean. And if anything, any kind of role or thought like that, is something we're dragging around with us, like I'm a victim, it's just so helpful to see that we're doing that innocently, not on purpose, but just with the way that we view thought and the way that we view ourselves and our minds, makes it such that we kind of wake up and we put that thought on. We kind of carry that with us from the past. And when people start to wake up to the fact that no, the slate is wiped clear all the time, and that we don't have to carry that victim thing around with us. It's just a thought. It's nothing more than a habitual thought that we've been carrying around for a long time and gathering evidence for. But when you see that, when someone really deeply sees that and sees that their slate is wiped clear, they just, if it's not serving you, they're just not going to carry it around anymore. It just really does start to fall away in that way. Because why would you do that to yourself when you see that you're doing that to yourself?
I think it's so wonderful talking to you, because when you talk about this stuff, you make it sound like it's so easy, because it is really, right? However, it took me, 35 years to understand this, because this isn't information that is readily available in society. Even if you're like a religious person that goes to church, sort of there's so much complexity behind sort of religion that the simple sort of stuff that all of these religious people talk about, sort of the initial kernel of the religion, which is spirituality, is so sort of masked, in all these just sort of complex layers that we're never really able to sort of get to this basic truth, which is that, the slate is wiped clean every day, and this whole stickiness that we have of past traumas are just thoughts. So how do you sort of help people, get to the point where they can just wipe things clean? What would be your approach? Because it's not quite as easy just saying, hey, just wipe the slates clean every day. You're the same physical body, but you have the choice to totally approach life from in a way you want to approach it, as opposed to approaching life from the background of these past traumatic experiences that you've had that now constitute the story of your life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So it comes via insight. It comes from people seeing what we're talking about in a really deep and personal way, and there's nothing really to do. So it will work for you when you see it that way. And again, think about the nightmare. It'd be like saying, how do you help people wake up and wipe their slate clear when they've had a bad nightmare? Well, you don't. You teach them that it was just a nightmare, which we all intuitively know from the time we're a kid, and the slate wipes clear. And it's the same with this. We don't have to wipe the slate clear. It's happening. We're just standing in the way from it happening with all of our beliefs about how the mind really works, and that we're flawed, and that things that happened in the past linger. Those are beliefs that we basically just look at and we start to see through them. And when people start to see through those things, it's just all different. Really, I know that it kind of feels like, it definitely felt like this to me when I was first hearing this, like somebody's holding out on you. Like there's got to be a technique or a tool or like a magic phrase or something, a drug, something that does this. And it truly, there really isn't. It really is about just seeing it in a deep way. So that, as when I work with clients, we just have conversations about this stuff, and we really look at it from all kinds of angles, and we just get into a deep conversation. and they tend to see things in a new way. And and what isn't working, what wasn't working, was something that they were carrying around with them, that we're getting in our own way all the time, dragging our old beliefs and dragging our history around. And when you see that, you just don't do it. It's like, when you realize that you're like hurting yourself, you just stop hurting yourself. And so it is very simple. It doesn't happen overnight for everyone, and for some people it does.
So
I think I think the simplicity. So what you said about the religion is super helpful, because there is so much complexity in that, and there's so much complexity in so many of our psychological theories, and so many, even some spiritual theories. They're complex, and I think that's always a sign that there's just a bunch of stuff there we don't need. And that's what I love about the principles, is they're extremely simple. There's nothing complicated or complex about it at all. Sometimes we have a hard time letting them be simple because we're used to trying to see through layers and layers, and so we kind of apply that here. But it's very simple. You're alive, you think, and you're aware. And from there, that's just a great starting point. That kind of explains it. And there's not much more. There really is, like, the principles, besides the fact that you're alive, you think, and you're aware. What you're aware of in any moment is nothing more than your own thinking.
And sort of how much of this would you say is attached to sort of the understanding that life happens in the present moment? Should I say more on that, or you got it?
Please.
So when we look at life from sort of a non-duality perspective, or any sort of spiritual perspective, really, everyone's saying the same thing. They're all saying that life happens now, like in this moment, right? The past is a perspective at this point in terms of what it's a reconstruction of what happened in terms of how we remember it, and we can choose to remember it really however we want to, you know what I mean? Depending on like how nice we are to ourselves, or and the future hasn't happened, right? So it's also sort of a construct in a different perspective. So how much of what we're talking about, like how much of life is really sort of how valid of a statement is it to say that life is just right now?
I think it's very valid. I mean, yeah, like it's, I don't know what that does for people. Like for me, that's like, okay, that doesn't do anything for me personally.
Okay.
I mean, I shouldn't say it does nothing. I mean, maybe I'm just very familiar with it. It's not like packing a huge punch, but so it's going to be different for everyone. But I mean, I think it's absolutely true, and it's certainly something that when you look at how our experience of life is created by moment to moment thinking and wisdom that we're getting in each and every moment, and that the past is literally completely done. When it's done, it's done. I mean, there is nothing there but for thoughts that we have about it. So that's just current thinking about the past. And the same is true of the future. We have current moment thinking about something that hasn't happened in the future. So, yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. And I know that does. I mean, I shouldn't, like, downplay. Like, that's a source of a lot of freedom for a lot of people, for sure.
So when someone is sitting with a lot of emotion that's being created, and this is my last question, when someone's sitting with a lot of emotion that's been created by thought, and that's at least how I understand sort of the chain of events, right? A thought happens, we get an emotional response to it, and then we respond to the emotional response. So let's say this, so how do people sort of, because we're not children, right? We're not animals either. We're not able to sort of just shake off these feelings as quickly as a child would do. So how do we handle sort of, we've had a negative thought already, it happened too fast for us to catch it, we recognize it's a negative thought, but it's left us feeling awful. So when we're in that situation, what do we do?
Well, okay, so again, it's kind of like the inquiry question. Like, I don't know what you do, but here's what I know to be true. Because I think everyone's going to do what occurs to them in the moment, and And honestly, what might be most helpful for you right now is not going to be most helpful tomorrow in that situation. And it's not going to necessarily be like the thing for everyone to do. But the more we see about how thought works, and again, this is something that's so difficult to explain, but I can just speak from my own experience. The more you see about these principles and how, and the truth of thought, and just how it ebbs and flows constantly throughout life, and there's always more coming. There's always more like waiting in line, just coming down the pike. The more you just find yourself naturally, you do become more like a child, and you do tend to shake things off. And not always. So when you get caught in something, so you have a negative thought, like you're saying, that really kind of sticks with you. Well, I don't know. I mean, you have a negative experience. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's part of being human. So I don't know that there's any kind of to do in any of it, really. I mean, you have some thought that brings you some emotion. Let's say it's emotion you really don't like. You either in that moment are blessed with an awareness of what's going on, and you don't shake it off, but you find yourself just moved on. You really do find yourself just bouncing back to that clear slate, and you move on, or you stew in the negativity. I mean, like that's one thing that I think is different about, I don't know if this is different, but one thing, about this is that it's not a strategy or tactics to like never experience bad stuff. It's a different perspective. I'm not saying that you're saying it is or anything, but I just, sometimes people have that understanding of it, is that it's definitely nothing about avoiding bad stuff, or like, that it would even be preferable to not have the gigantic wide range of human emotion. I mean, I think it is preferable to have all of that stuff. I think it gives you a perspective on what it is. Like, it doesn't weigh you down when you don't take it so seriously. When you see what it is, this is spiritual stuff, just coming through me, and it's just at the ebb and flow of life. You just don't get bogged down by it to the same extent. And sometimes you do. Occasionally you do. And when you do, well, then you do. Then you're human. You have a bad day. Yeah. And I think that's like the beauty in this, is that like it speaks to that resilience. And it's like it can be good or bad. It doesn't matter what you're in. The possibility for bouncing back and just not being so taken down by the seriousness, perceived seriousness of all of this is enormous. And that's been kind of like the real freedom, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's about the allowance of the consequence of the thought. It's about allowing yourself to experience that in a way that's very natural, and then when you're done experiencing it, you're done experiencing it. But then to try to like force yourself out of that experience, or to force yourself away from sadness or anxiety or something, doesn't work, because then that's directly a repression of your experience, which then leads to like bigger problems, right?
Yeah. It just activates it. It keeps it alive. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. So we're getting close to time here, and this was just awesome. I really think it's fun, and I think it needs to be edited a little bit because it got broken up. And anyway, I'll email you about that. But I wanted to close this with just asking you about this event you're putting on, and what it's all about in terms of and what you're going to be doing there.
Yeah, so it's well, thanks for asking. It's a weekend, Saturday and half day Sunday opportunity to kind of get together in a room of a relatively small group, probably 20 to 30 people, who are all kind of on a path to just seeing this understanding and taking a closer look at what it means to be human. So there are going to be myself and 3 other teachers. The 3 of them have been around this work for 30 plus years, 35 years or so. So I'm kind of the newbie in the group, even though I'm putting on the event. I'm smart like that. I get people who are smarter than me to come teach with me. So, but the 3 of them have just incredible experiences talking about this, and they go around the world talking about it, and they work with clients of all different kinds of populations. And so they're going to be sharing their stories, and I'm going to be sharing mine, and we're just really going to spend a day and a half looking at how our experience is created, what's possible, how is it possible that we can be in that place where we get to be like kids again, where you have the emotion and then you just bounce right back. Like, how do we get that bounce back time to be so much quicker?
Mm.
And you know, we get to talk with like-minded people who will be in the room and do all kinds of great things. And I think, you know, just my own experience of being at events like this is you really, really do, from being in the room and getting the feeling that's there from everyone kind of looking in the same direction at the same time, it kind of like takes on a new power in a way. And I've never gone to an event like this and not been on, you know, a big high and kind of just seeing life different afterward. So that's what I'm hoping for everyone who attends.
I really like what you said about being human, right? Which happens to be one of your book titles.
It does. What a coincidence.
But I love this sort of the concept of learning how to bounce back faster and sort of in a very human way. So we're still experiencing the emotion. We're not turning ourselves into robots. You know, we're not sort of discounting human experience, which a lot of philosophies do, which I'm not going to mention. But the idea of being able to shake things off, you know, with more ease, you know, but in a way that still allows us to experience human emotion, I think is amazing. Because then you're looking at basically, I mean, I can see so many benefits from that. I mean, wide-ranging benefits in terms of like, you know, overcoming fears in life or limiting beliefs or these, you know, negative emotions we have, either if it's, you know, it's, for me, it really resonates from a business perspective because so much about being an entrepreneur is about taking risks and about putting yourself out there in a way that leads yourself to a lot of criticism for people that don't understand what you're doing or sort of are in deep admiration of your courage to have done it, but it's very frightening to them to imagine doing something like that. So sometimes they can react negatively, and that's where this phenomenon of haters come from, which is so prevalent on like YouTube and I don't think it's that these people are bad or anything like that. I think it's these fears that are coming out at them. So I think if we can learn how to experience fear in a way that's safe, so safe meaning that, you know, we're experiencing it fully, and then we're allowing it ourselves to be like, okay, I've experienced it, now I can put that down and move on with my life so I can continue to be, you know, so I can continue to live my dreams and build my business or, you know, build great relationships or meet that special person. So I can see so many sort of practical applications, and I know you don't necessarily like to talk about that, but I just think the work that you're doing is amazing, and I'm so sort of I have so much gratitude for you and for your work.
Thank you. No, I think I love to talk about the applications too. I think there are so many, but I love what you said about that. You know, just being able to experience fear and all kinds of other things and just see it as insecure thought in the moment. It doesn't have to, that you don't have to respect. You don't have to take it so seriously. You know, we all feel it. I don't know anyone who doesn't. And so think about anything, like you said, doing a venture, a business venture where you're doing things new and fearing rejection or a new relationship or anything, and knowing that no matter what happens, it's not about you. You know, it's not something you have to take so seriously. I mean, there's this amazing freedom in that.
Mm.
Cool. So thank you so much for this interview. It was really, really wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah, it was so much fun. And we could do this for a week, right?
Yeah.
So I'll email you, and I probably will have to do a little bit of editing with this. But thank you so much, and I'll email you before the end of the day.
Okay.
All right,
Cool.
take
Thank
care.
you.
All right,
Okay.
bye-bye.